Mailbox infrastructure and volume limits, which also includes rotations and just the way you manage batches. Going to be a bunch of topics that we go over. We'll start with mailbox batch systems, just the way they work, how we utilize them, rotation schedules, functions, etc. Then we'll do the actual allocations and limits of each and what the total comes out to and why they are the way they are. Those are going to be the only two that we go through today because there's quite a lot of them. And then next week we'll discuss the rotation methodology that we use, which can change, like we're always adjusting it to what makes the most sense. And then we'll go through the exact warm-up and active sending ramps that we use, and then mailbox settings and functions, plus their associated limits in Instantly. So I'll probably pull up Instantly next week for us and actually take you guys through every single one of them, just so you guys understand what they are, what they mean. Sounds good?
Yep.
Okay. So the point of the mailbox batch system actually has a lot of features for us, which is why we use it. There might even be some logic to having a third one, like some businesses actually use 4 batches that they have. But obviously the downside is it gets very expensive, right? Especially if you're only using them as a backup batch, not actively using them, you're paying for protection. So your margins get thinner the more you have, and there's kind of a fine line where you don't want to push it too far or you're just wasting money. For the regular maintenance, so these are the 4 kind of core functions. For regular maintenance rotations, we have them on a certain kind of timeline that will regularly swap them out, which helps us by allowing us to enable regular mailbox warm-up. Because the alternative is that, let's say you have 10 domains for a client or 20, and what some people do is they'll have kind of a limit set up where if they fall under 80% mailbox health or some sort of parameter that they have it set up as, they would just pull that mailbox out. But what that means is that your volumes are constantly fluctuating. So you're constantly going up and down depending on what's pulled out or added in, and you're having to replace them on the go. And when you replace them, it's at least 3 weeks. So you're having to deal with constant mailbox fluctuations and sending them fluctuations, which makes it really hard to predict or know what targets you could hit with your numbers. Lets you maintain volume, obviously. So like I mentioned, instead of having to pull them out, because we have a second batch, if something is wrong with one or we want to rewarm a batch, which you always want to do at some point so it doesn't just die quickly, we can just swap to the other batch, which is the exact same. We're able to send with the same volume while this one rewarms. So like, let's say we assume that regular mailboxes have about 4 months of time span, just hypothetically. They don't, but let's just say hypothetically. If you rewarm them at month 2 before you get to that 4-month span, right? Like as the deliverability is declining from, let's say, 90% down to 70, you put them in rewarm for 2 months, you're going to go up a little bit to 80 again, right? So it actually gives you more time on them if you're using 2 or 3 rotations, because you're letting them rewarm instead of just letting them die entirely. Because once they hit a certain threshold and they don't land in any mailboxes, you're not recovering them anymore. You know, it's kind of like once you break your leg entirely, like there's no fixing it. But we're kind of resting and recovering while we still can before we push it too far, which is the extent domain's lifespan in theory. So rather than just getting, you know, both have 4 months, we get 8. In theory, if the rotation works correctly, we should be able to extend that to, you know, 5 or 6 months each, because we're letting them recover with those steps when we swap the other one in. Make sense so far? Cool. Emergency swaps obviously is a big one. So probably one of the primary features or reasons that we brought this in is because in the past we had mailboxes or domains die. Like we literally had 3 weeks of no sending, or we would just send to everyone and we were just burning leads. Nothing was getting anywhere. We're panicked, having to like make up something to the customer, or we're already guaranteeing a month of free run. So any money that we were saving by not paying for extra mailboxes, we were just losing on free run anyway. So it's very much worth having these just for the one-off, like 1 in 3 customers when you need to swap the other one in, because you either have like mailbox issues, so that could be like disconnects, problems you've been having with Zapmail or Maildoso, stuff gets blacklisted. There's so many things that you can't predict that can come up. And maybe it happens to both batches, but there's also a good chance that it only happens to one. So you at least have the other one as potential. Or if it happens to a fraction of both of them, we can always rearrange the batches, right, to pick out the domains that actually are functional and make those a functional batch. Put the other ones in the other one, either let them rewarm or just replace it entirely while we have the active one sending. Make sense? So that's deliverability concerns. And then same with replacement, right? So if we know an entire batch is dead and we're swapping to another one, we don't have to sit there and wait for 3 weeks. We have one running that's actually completely functional. We rewarm those, and then we can go back into regular maintenance rotation unless something else happens. So the emergency swaps do override the maintenance rotations and whatever schedule they're on, If something comes up, we'll obviously just swap it out and then we'll adjust the maintenance rotation from there on. Another, really useful factor is being able to double the output temporarily. So each batch has a certain sending volume, and using them both is obviously risky, right? Because if we're using them both for 3 months at a time and they both die, now we go from double to zero. We don't want to do that. But if it's the last month for a client, or we're already doing a transition, we can double that volume for that month because the risk isn't that crazy high for a month. Like chances are they're going to be okay. And we'd have signs before if the deliverability was off or the copy was really bad. So it lets us really push if we need to for a month instead of having to go into free run temporarily. Just keep in mind that that should be temporary. Like it's not a permanent solution. If we permanently need more volume for a client, then a third batch needs to be purchased or something else needs to be adjusted so we get better results. Make sense? The spread helps. So if we, let's say, bring in the second batch, right? Let's say you guys will see this in the next slide, but the theoretical limit is 460 emails a day per batch. If we add in the second batch and we bump that to 600, it actually is less emails per mailbox because there's a bigger spread, right? So it's very easy when we do our transition to actually increase the volume while still lowering the risk of each mailbox because the spread is across way more mailboxes. Because the huge thing is like, how many are you sending per mailbox? Are you sending 5 a day per mailbox? You'd be fine for a long time. Whereas when you're pushing it to 20 to 30 and your results are questionable, then you're gonna run out of time eventually. Because the hard limit is usually 20, except for Microsoft, which you'll see in the next slide as well. And then the transition volume. So the transition is something we'll talk about next week, but in the transition phase, when we swap between the batches, we kind of do a somewhat of a warm swap, so rather than just hard stopping one and starting the other, which would look really weird, right? Like suddenly your emails are going from sending 20 per mailbox a day to 0, and the other ones were sending nothing a day besides warm up, and they're suddenly spiking. We kind of do a slow transition where we phase the old batch out slowly and increase volume on the new one slowly. So there's like an inverse curve, right? That kind of evenly goes up rather than having this like harsh transition. And again, can give you increased volume because you can, let's say instead of 20 per day for the old one, you can bump it down to 15 and put the new one that you're putting in at 10. Now you're already at more than you were before, right? Because you have 2 batches with a little bit less, but the average is still higher. So the transition really helps us, especially because it tends to fall in the last month of a client. And then the last thing is just transition coverage. This is a more rare situation, but for things that come up like name changes, or if a client wants to change a name, it usually would have presented a problem for us because when you change the name, you have to set up an alias, otherwise the old emails get lost. There's kind of like a couple days that you should be waiting before resending. So inevitably, you're gonna have a downturn in volume or like an abrupt change in the campaign. Whereas what we can do here is we can just let the active batch keep sending, change the names on the other one, then swap them over, and then change the other one. Does that make sense? Sounds probably complex, but all we're doing is essentially changing one name and letting it finalize while we're retaining this one. And then we can swap, lose no volume in theory at all, and then change the other one. Same thing with workspace swaps. Like if we ever have to move somebody between instantly workspaces from one CSC to another, it's a huge pain in the ass. Like it sounds easy in theory, but you lose all the data when you move between them. They don't retain any of the reply rates or anything. But you also, let's say you pull all the new leads out of a campaign, right? You still have a bunch of people at step 2 and 3. So if you entirely kill that campaign, you basically kill any lead at step 2 or 3 because you're moving those mailboxes to another instantly workspace. So what we would have to do in the past is we would have to kind of pull out any new leads, but let the active ones finish out, which can take a week, sometimes even 2 weeks. And the volume is really low, right? Because like we're not just sending step 1s, 2, and 3s. We're now just like waiting for the 2 and 3s to slowly fizzle out. So you'll have like 30 per day, then 10 per day, then 20 per day. And as you're waiting for this fizzle, you're just losing total volume. And because instantly you have to move the mailboxes between the workspaces, like you either have to leave them or move them. There's kind of no choice you have. When we have 2 batches, it's easy, right? We just move the inactive batch over. We can start it up already and let the other one fizzle out. So it makes that transition like incredibly easy. We don't have to worry about assessing like, do we kill these step 2s and 3s or do we not? Does that make sense, especially for you, Joel, like having not seen this much and probably explain that in a somewhat convoluted and complicated way? Yeah? Okay.
No, it's good. Thanks.
Okay. So batch allocation and limits, these could change, just so you guys know. We've been talking about potentially changing some stuff here. I don't know how much I love or believe in Maildoso. Basically, each batch consists of 7 domains that we purchase. The limits differ particularly between Google and Microsoft. So Google and private tend to all be the same, but Microsoft, at least the setup that we use with Hypertide, is a little bit different. So they use something called Azure, which is like Microsoft's cloud networking function that they host businesses on for their email. And the reason it's different is that they try to have this infrastructure where it makes it look like it's a larger company. So rather than a domain with 3 emails, they try to emulate like having 50 emails on one domain, but they're all sending at very low volume, trying to get like closer to looking like a more organic corporation, I guess, in terms of sending. They might also have harsher limits with Microsoft, right? Like Google 20 per day has been no problem. I'm not sure how realistic that is with Microsoft, which is why your limits are different. So with Google, 20 per day, Microsoft has 2 per day, but you do have more domains or more emails per domain actually, right? So one domain will get you 50 mailboxes and a max of 100 emails a day. Warm up is also lower, obviously, for these reasons. In comparison, Google, you have your domains, 3 mailboxes per domain, and 20 emails per day. So one domain with 3 emails is 60 emails a day. So they look very different. Microsoft is, or Hypertide is super important because it performs almost generally better, but especially better towards Microsoft. When we treat it right, I mean, it's a complicated topic that we'll go into more in future whatever sessions. But we need to use them, but they are expensive to use, and you have to buy them in batches of 2 domains. So we can't just buy 1 domain. When we buy them, we have to buy 2 at once. So it's a little more expensive to allocate, and we have to be smart with how we use them, because your cost per email is technically much higher than with Google or private. So the maximum, if we count all these up, so there's 240 per day, 120, and 100, comes out to 460 emails per batch per day. That doesn't mean 460 leads per day, emails. The easiest division, the lowest you would get, is just dividing it by 3. Most of our campaigns are 3 steps. Generally, you will actually get a bit more, right? Because if people respond at step 1 or step 2, you're actually removing some of the emails from the equation. But an easy calculation is just take whatever we can send per day and divide it by 3, and that's how many new leads on average you can hit per day, if we have it set to that. Volume can be managed at the mailbox or the domain or the campaign level, sorry. Not super relevant, but generally we just keep the mailboxes maxed out and we manage it at the campaign level because that's just the easiest way to do it. Because that way, if you have multiple campaigns, right, it's just easy to split. Like if your limit is 300, you just do 150, 150 if you have 2 campaigns. Or if you want to shift more towards 1, you do 200, 100. 300 is the starting volume. Just while we're ramping, we want to see what the results are. We want to see, okay, is our copy actually good enough before we're blasting as many leads as we can? And then we're actually killing a bunch of leads because we had 2 step 1s in there that just had no results. So we kind of want to taper up slowly, figure out copy a little bit, make sure our targeting is accurate, and then we start ramping the volume. So A, we're not wasting leads, and B, it just gives us a better chance to maintain deliverability, because the higher you push your volume with the results and replies you have, the more risk you're at. Like you're kind of just redlining the car essentially when you're doing that. And by default, each client starts with 2 batches. There's rare exceptions we've had where like you guys might sign somebody who's a, I don't know, not on contract. So we might only buy 1 batch, and then if they commit at month 2 or 3, then we'll buy the second batch just to reduce costs. But usually we start every client with the same allocation of 2 batches. And third ones can be purchased. We've done it rarely, but if a client's a good fit and they're paying enough and we see them staying with us for a long time, we can purchase a 3rd batch to be able to have 2 active and have 1 out of rotation.